conversation about inclusive growth from the boardroom, please welcome to the stage Ambassador Michael Froman, Vice Chairman of MasterCard. Andrea Jung, CEO of Grameen America. Josh Bolton, CEO of the Business Roundtable. And Anne Finucane, Vice Chairman at Bank of America. Leading the conversation, please welcome Alan Murray, CEO of Fortune.
I think it's great, by the way, Michael, that the voice of God is a woman.
Absolutely, as it should be.
Appropriate. So I see people are still coming in. Please grab a seat, but we'll dive right in. I've been a journalist covering business for 4 decades. I hate to say that. But I think something fundamentally different has been happening in the last 5 years, and that's the topic we're going to talk about on this panel today. There is a focus on the social contribution of business going on in this country at a much more vibrant rate than has at any other time in those 40 years. And the first question I want to ask our great panel here is why? What's happening now that's so fundamentally different? Michael, you want to take that first?
So, look, I think, as you said, in some respects, this conversation has been having for a long time. And there isn't a lot of new in it, but it's the number of people and maybe the decibel level of the conversation that's new. And I think it's in part because we're all seeing what it means, for example, when you don't have inclusive growth, and when people feel like they've been left behind, and the kind of political and social ramifications that come from that. And so I think we're all companies are looking and saying, what's the environment we want to operate in? What's the best environment for us to succeed? It's an environment where we're dealing not just with short-term shareholder returns, but the long-term shareholder returns, and that means taking care of employees, communities, customers, partners, in a way that perhaps hasn't gotten the attention it's gotten.
When you say that people see what's happening now, are you talking about political pressure?
I don't say political pressure. I think the changing environment, not only in this country, but in other countries, where increasingly we're seeing that people are questioning fundamental institutions, democracy, capitalism, and a lot of the questions deserve some kind of answer. Companies operate in a social environment, and they realize that their long-term shareholder value is going to be affected one way or the other by how these questions are answered.
Andrea, you were a CEO. You still sit on boards. What do you see that's different?
Well, it's interesting because, when I became a CEO in, 1999, and when you kind of go back to that time, a little bit of a rule of thumb was, you've got customers, and in my case at Avon, representatives, half of them are Democrats, half of them are Republicans, sort of go down the middle of the line and, don't necessarily take a position and be more neutral. It's changed so dramatically right now. Everybody is looking for leadership. They are looking for corporate leadership. If you do not take a stand on an issue, which comes with everything that taking a stand on comes with, you're tone deaf. And I think there's a new level of activism. So, whether it was women on the boards, et cetera, where you might have a shareholder activists maybe coming and showing up at a meeting, it's coming from the bottom up. There is no question that you now have employee activism and you have customer activism because they want leadership to make the decision. So they're going to have sit-ins, they're going to have walkouts, and they're going to boycott the brand. And that level of, and there's a healthy thing to that, but it is creating the urgency to, I think, do the right thing, which we've known all along. But when you make decisions, whether it is Dick's Sporting Goods to take $5 million of weapons and take them off the these decisions I didn't see when I grew up in my early years as CEO, as CEOs making these decisions, and I think it is, a testimony to the demand for leadership in sort of an existential time.
Andrea, I have to say, as a journalist whose job is to try and get CEOs to say controversial things, to me, that's the biggest change. It's kind of stunning. You think about the last 5 years, Mark Benioff coming out against the religious liberties law in Indiana, Bank of America coming out against a law restricting transgender access to public bathrooms, Delta Airlines in Atlanta taking away its discount program for the NRA. Example after example that I can can tell you as somebody who's been in this field, would not have happened 10 years ago. None of them would have happened 10 years ago.
And I can stand that just wasn't the code, if you would, and it's so important and such a great change.
Yeah.
I think it's
Josh,
fundamentally
I know you've spent a good part of the last year on this issue because the Business Roundtable has been an important marker. You had a statement that was put out in the 1990s in the era of takeovers and corporate raiders that said, by God, the first responsibility of a company is to its shareholders. You altered that, the Business Roundtable altered that statement in August. Can you tell us how you look at this question? Why now are you altering the 20-year-old policy?
It's everything that has already been said, and I think it's one more thing, which is that the CEOs, the leadership of American business companies are increasingly, and I believe properly, worried about support for our free market system in this country. And they recognize that they have a responsibility to ensure that business is viewed in the proper light. Now, Ajay Banga and MasterCard have been operating according to basically a stakeholder model for many years, but a lot of people have not been aware of that. And so when we did our statement in August, it was a statement that both captured how CEOs really operate in today's America, which is, I agree completely different from the way they operated 20 or even 10 years ago, and also to challenge themselves and others to do better, and to have a vision that says that corporations operate not just to ensure that next year's profitability and share price is as high as possible, but to support all of their stakeholders, because in the very long run, and I mean the very long run, taking care of all of the stakeholders, customers, employees, suppliers, communities, and shareholders, that's the way you take care of your shareholders in the long run.
You've gotten some public pushback against that. I mean, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist has said you're taking away your responsibilities to the shareholder. That business is going soft. That you're coddling Elizabeth Warren. There've been a lot of different criticisms. That's what they say. I'm just reporting.
No, they accused us of trying to appease Elizabeth Warren, and my answer is, and by the way, not just once, but several times in several publications, which, I mean, imagine the Wall Street Journal editorializing 3 times against the science of the Business Roundtable. I mean,
yeah, that's a new. You've reached a new high for the Business Roundtable. 3 in a row against you.
But we don't actually disagree. The CEOs of the Roundtable are not attempting to appease Elizabeth Warren, not attempting to appear to be abandoning the free market system. They are trying to make sure that the free market system flourishes in this country. And the way to do that in this day and age is to ensure that corporations are properly seen to be taking care of all of their stakeholders.
Yeah. And I've watched you push these issues at Bank of America for a decade now.
Right.
How have you seen the attitudes towards this change at the bank?
Well, I mean, just to echo what others have said, I think the level of engagement is certainly accelerated. Also because you have a more diverse workplace. 43% of our workplace is diverse in some way. 40% of the board is diverse. 40% of the executive management is diverse. And that means for a different dialogue. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think the level of engagement in social media, et cetera, there's just, you must engage. There is no sort of pushing things off. And thirdly, I meet with our top investors, our top 50 institutional investors. And I would tell you 5 years ago, if you were to talk about social responsibility or ESG or what are issues of diversity, that would be when the PMs would get up, the portfolio managers would get up and get their coffee. Then they would come back. Today, I'm facing 3 people across from the institutional shareholder, and they are asking very tough questions. What are you doing in terms of women? What are you doing in terms of climate? Not because they are necessarily political, but they see this as inevitable stuff, that what we politicize here is not politicized elsewhere in the world, climate, that there are some real realities, and that not to allow women to flourish to their full extent is a way of holding back in terms of economic opportunity. And so we are faced with that. So speaking to what Josh said, our CEOs this is what they're dealing with day to day. We must be inclusive.
Well, but that in itself is a big change. I mean, you guys were talking about pressure from employees, which I know is a big part of it. But you're saying now you're actually getting pressure from the shareholders themselves.
Yes.
That's a huge change.
And Alan, I think that's why this is an important part of the conversation, because I think setting up this, frankly, a false dichotomy between shareholders and everybody else is probably not terribly helpful, in that this really is all about shareholder value, broadly defined, whether it's short-term versus long-term, whether it's having to convince or explain to shareholders what you're doing in these areas that are creating long-term value for the company, or whether it's being able to attract and retain talent in a highly competitive environment. It's all about, in my view, long-term shareholder value. And you can, I think, deal with some of the skepticism of the Wall Street Journal editorial board by saying, no, in fact, this is shareholder value we're going after. We're doing this because this is what's important to succeed for shareholder value creation overall.
Although not all of it is. So, I mean, we took on a position on guns, on transgender, on private prisons, and I would say the institutional shareholders were not exactly sitting on either shoulder while that happened.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, they are looking for these long-term, clearly beneficial to a broader society, and they also know reality.
Yeah, I spent, the flip side of that is what happens in a company when it's under shareholder attack and it's focused on the short term. I spent all of 2017 in the dying days of Time Inc. in the C-suite. Since the company doesn't exist anymore, I can talk about it, I guess, but saw decisions being made when you're focused on what are we going to tell, what are we going to report this quarter, decisions being made that improved your quarterly results, but were clearly detrimental to employees, to customers, to the long-term prospects of the company. I suspect all of you have seen similar examples.
Yeah, I can just give one example. I actually joined the board of Unilever after there was, a lot of discussion with Kraft Heinz and this
the takeover
question of what's going to happen to the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which I think is pretty, known for being a leader in commitment to sustainability and to community. And I just have to say, coming in after that, there was such a DNA belief that in the march to 20% margins was not going to be sacrificed, that this was a commitment to customers, it was a commitment to employees, it was a commitment to communities, and it was non-negotiable. And you saw that through the years, and it's reflected in pay, it was reflected in board committees, so kind of 360 degrees. So it can be done. Not easy, but it can be done. But when you are under threat, and I think there was some skepticism, was this going to go?
Yeah, but because the minute Unilever returns went down, people said, well, wait a minute, is it because you're focusing too much on the stakeholders? Josh, I'm sure you guys had robust conversations about this. How do you deal with the trade-off issue? Because there are, in the short term, clearly cases where there's a trade-off between paying attention to the employees, customers, communities, and getting the best bottom line number.
And the best CEOs are looking very long term. I mean, even in Bank of America's case, and where the institutional
Hello?
Even in the case that you just mentioned, where the institutional investors were not necessarily happy with some positions that Bank of America took on social issues. I bet those will redound to the benefit of Bank of America shareholders, but you have to have a very long view, and that's the debate we had at the Business Roundtable among the CEOs, where almost as we talked about it, almost every one of them had stories about, I took tobacco products off the shelves at CVS
Yeah,
and I lost $2 billion in revenue
I-
as a result
However,
of that.
I'm on that board, and we gain share in terms of
Exactly.
health products.
Right.
Oh, it did. It worked
that's-
even in the short term. That one worked
that's
pretty well.
But that's exactly.
But as you know, Josh, I talked to four of the CEOs who really pushed that through the Business Roundtable. Ginny Rometty at IBM, Mary Barra at GM, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, and Alex Gorski at J&J. And it only struck me afterwards, all four of them are from companies that have been around for more than 100 years. That's significant. You take a different view of the world if you're
Well,
part
we've
of something.
done, so it's true that I'm not sure that the institutional shareholders were against us when we no longer would bank gun companies that sold semi-automatics to civilians or got out of private prisons. We thought that was the right decision for us. But what they are looking for, it wasn't they were against or for us. We didn't really hear from them. We heard from customers, though. But the thing is that for us, we've done 5 reports. We were talking about this backstage from the equity research end, and the long-term value of making these kinds of long-term decisions. There is enough evidence, even looking back, to indicate those companies that are looking at these big gnarly issues and trying to set a course that is reasonable, like trying to reach carbon neutrality at some point. As an example, that those companies also are probably taking other wise decisions, and they are better bets than this short-termism.
Yeah, there's been some good research on that show even in the sort of short to medium term, you get better returns if you invest in the companies
Less
that are
volatile.
They're less volatile. Now, there's a bit of a chicken and egg there. Are they doing good because they're doing well? Or are they doing well because they're doing good? I get confused about which is good and which is well. Michael, Ambassador, excuse me.
I think Michael's fine. I told you, I only make my children call me ambassador.
But MasterCard's an interesting case because some of the things I see MasterCard doing around the world may have long-term benefit, but you're talking really long-term. You're talking about populations that are nowhere close to the profit-making businesses of the world. How do you justify that?
Well, look, I think we committed a few years ago to bring 500 million more individuals into the financial system at the base of the pyramid, basically. And now that we're achieving that goal, we're already focusing on what the next objective is to help them towards greater financial security. Our perspective is, look, we may never make a penny off of a good number of those 500 million, but if they are in a more stable economy, if that economy is more inclusive, if that economy is thriving, we thrive. And if they are living in a failed state, then we're going to fail too in that market. And so we do view it as part of long-term value creation, even if we can't say that customer is going to be worth so much to us in exactly this many years. I would also say a lot of what we do, we're working with Gavi and the Global Fund to help them deliver, using our technology to help them track the delivery of vaccines and health outcomes. Be able to go to a government and say, we're working to help your population be healthier, to be better educated, to get better access to credit, to sell their products to market in a more efficient and a more productive way. The government says, okay, you're a partner of ours. You're here to stay, you're a partner of ours. And that has long-term value creation for our shareholders as well.
And I have to go back to this North Carolina example because to me it's one of the most fascinating ones. Bank of America is the largest employer in the state of North Carolina.
Right.
The state legislature passes a law, majority vote, passes a law saying transgender people cannot have access to the bathroom of their choice. I have trouble stating that one correctly too. And you guys spoke out. The CEO spoke out. Now that's exactly the kind of issue that 10 years ago any CEO would have hidden under the desk from. It's a controversial social issue, doesn't directly affect my bottom line, has nothing to do with banking. Why did you have to speak out about it?
Because what kind of employer are you if you're saying, I'll be a good employer for you, but not for you? It had to be. So it was really about that. It was about our employees and making them feel that they had a safe place to be in our company. And I actually think most of this work needs to begin and does begin, as Josh knows, with the employee benefits these companies offer, the way we treat our own employees, and that really was the genesis of this. How could we go forward if we weren't trying to take care of our own people?
Yeah. So as all of you know, we live at a time when employees want to be working for companies that are doing good in the world, but we also live at a time of great cynicism. I just came a few moments ago from a panel at the Fortune Most Powerful Women Conference, which Andrea and Ann, you're welcome to join, but Josh and Michael, you are not. I'm sorry. But
I thought there was room for a few good men.
That's all I have to say.
Not completely included. They let me go. That was focused on this notion of purpose washing. There are a lot of companies now, because this has become a big thing, because of the Business Roundtable statement, there are a lot of companies going out and making statements about the great things they are doing good in the world. And it's very difficult sometimes for people to know the difference between what's real and what isn't real. How do you deal with the cynicism? And I throw that open to the group, because I know you've all had to deal with it in different ways.
Well, I'll begin. I think the cynicism is going to be there. But again, if you can start with your employees and they feel like you're walking the walk, your benefits are good, you're inclusive, you're showing opportunity. If you then go the next step of what are the kinds of things you're doing in your communities, and what are you doing as a company? So we're a financial services company. We're trying to do a lot in the areas of blended finance and carbon neutrality, things we can actually do. We're the largest underwriter of green bonds. These are the kinds of things you've got to demonstrate to your own people first, to the communities in which you work and live. And by the way, for us, we just had a record quarter. We have never done better as a company. So I don't think it's been a trade-off.
And Ann's exactly right that the way companies.
This time.
No,
She finally got it.
You were right the last time. It's just long-term right.
I think the answer, Josh,
not
is she's
short-term
always right. So just let's start from that premise. And then work back.
And it's always right.
Thank you, Ambassador. And one of the most important ways that all of the companies in the Business Roundtable, and I think the best businesses all over America, the way they are walking the walk and taking care of their employees is in making sure that they have proper skills training, because that's one of the things that's tearing most at our societal fabric is the educational preparation and the skills training needed to have the jobs that are constantly changing. And so all of the companies at the Business Roundtable are engaged within their own communities and sometimes even more broadly in trying to make sure that they're doing what they can to prepare their future and their current employees for the jobs that are going to be available in the future.
Andrea,
I think if you
ahead.
have the data and the case is made and you do the right thing, skepticism is skepticism. But I mean, just take the issue of gender pay gap. I mean, I don't know. I've been sort of feeling like I've been in the business world as one of the women at the top, like Ann, for a lot of years in this conversation of 78 cents on the dollar for the same. I mean, it's just been going on for so long. But to the point, I think this is the moment. I mean, if we don't do something about it, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? So if you're a CEO, you don't need government to make, this is not about minimum wage. You just have to sit there. It's not just the reports on gender pay gap. If there's a 10% difference, an 18% difference, you look and you had to tell your analysts that you're talking about X cents a share as a one-time adjustment to pay fairly. It's the right thing to do. I mean, it's just simply the right thing to do. And so, I mean, I think that this washing is not washing if it's authentic, and people can read through authenticity by action immediately, whether it's an employee or any stakeholder. So I think it's just being, to your point, courageous to do the right thing. And this is the generation of corporate leadership that has to do it right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Alan, can I just throw in one more thing on taking care of and responding to the employees? Because one of the things that struck me when we put out our statement on corporate purpose in August It got a lot more attention than I expected. By the way, it also got a lot more support than I expected to your first question, which
But
is,
don't you attribute that to the fact that it was the cover of Fortune magazine? Why?
I do. I do. I now know to agree with everyone over here. And actually, it did. I mean, it was important to get some proper publicity to this change. It was easier to get the consensus than I expected. We have 192 members of the Business Roundtable, all CEOs, and 183 of them put their personal signature on this, and we published it, ironically, with all their signatures in the Wall Street Journal. So we paid the Wall Street Journal to criticize us for what we did.
And may I point out, you didn't advertise in Fortune, so next time you need to think differently about that decision.
And one of the things that really struck me in the aftermath was the reactions that I got back from the CEOs and from the companies on two ends. One was a call from a company that said, please, can we sign the statement? And I said, well, why didn't you sign it? Well, they were between CEOs, and we're a CEO organization, so if you don't have a permanent CEO, then you don't have a member. And they said, please, can we sign it? We are getting hammered by our employees for failing to sign the Business Roundtable statement. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, for the CEOs that signed, about a dozen of them sent me emails, forwarding emails from their employees about how proud they were of the company, to acknowledge this broader responsibility to all the stakeholders. And that's really what a lot of the CEOs were responding to, was that they and were proud of, in having put their names on this statement, was the way their employees reacted. So I don't think we can at all underestimate in this trend the importance of business leaders responding to what their employees want them to do and how they want them to present themselves to the world.
Yeah. Michael, we live at this moment of increasing globalization. I think technology is driving that, whether we want it or not. You guys largely represent global businesses, but we also live in a moment of nationalism. How do you reconcile that?
I've noticed that.
You have noticed that, and so you're how do you reconcile the tension between, if you're off doing great things for the people of the third world, does that somehow mean that you're hurting the workers of America?
Well, first, I think we need to recognize that the challenges, for example, of inclusive growth are not just challenges in emerging economies or in developing countries. We have challenges right here at home in other advanced industrialized countries as well, and we need to be equally focused on the people who are excluded here, unbanked, underbanked, left behind, feeling vulnerable. And I think part of today's discussion, the whole day, has been around what lessons do we learn from all around the world that we can apply in markets like this to have a positive effect. But I do think one of the reasons we are seeing nationalism is precisely because we probably haven't paid enough attention to the inclusive part of inclusive growth previously. And we've been very focused on growth. We've seen tremendous benefits around the world, including in these countries, but there have been winners and losers. And we haven't had necessarily the policy response to deal with people who are left behind. And I think there's a role for the private sector increasingly to step up and to step in with its capacity to try and address these issues as well.
Andrea?
I mean, I can,
yeah.
I had the fortune now, having moved from the for-profit CEOship to running a nonprofit micro-lending program that's incredibly scaled right here in the US. And I'm not just doing this because these guys are sitting here on stage, plus some great supporters here in the audience. But I mean, the focus and the realization that inclusive growth in the United States is a huge issue, and microfinance being perceived as an extraordinarily powerful impact in the developing nations. But right here, a mile from here, 2 miles from Wall Street, I mean, we're talking about income inequality, lack of access for financial inclusion for women in this country that is extraordinary. And, the focus and the programs internationally, I think, are extraordinary from companies, but MasterCard, Bank of America, Citi, Prudential, I mean, everybody understands it's a big problem here, and we've been really fortunate to have, you know, that partnership to put capital to work when it's not going to women.
We have 46 seconds left, and I'm sorry to bring up such a big topic in 46 when we only, well, it's now 41. But is this activism on the part of corporations happening because of the failure of our political system? Yes or no? Because we're now down to 30 seconds.
Josh?
What?
Josh?
I was going to wait to hear what Ann said and just agree with it.
And you get to go first.
I don't know. I think it's important that we raise our voices and be heard because there is some difficulty in getting some consensus in elected officials.
Everybody buy that?
Yes.
I think it's part of it, and I don't think it's just the United States. I think it's a worldwide issue.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah.
Here, here. Thank you. Thank you for a great discussion. Really fabulous.